Before we begin our moonlit wander through ancient Rome, tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Share your city or country in the comments. I love seeing this sleepy little community stretch from one horizon to the other. Now, settle in, breathe. Let the eternal city unfold in soft lamplight. Imagine the last warmth of the Roman sun slipping behind the Janiculum, the sky turning first copper, then violet, then the kind of blue that seems to drink sound. When darkness finally settles, the city does not vanish. It changes its rhythm. The Romans understood this change so well that they divided the night like a careful craftsman divides thread, into 4 watches: prima, secunda, tertia, quarta tertia, and quarta vigilia, stretching from sunset to the first pale edge of dawn. The exact length of each watch breathed with the seasons. In summer, when the night was short, the watches tightened. In winter, they loosened and grew long. A soldier on the frontier, a baker in the Subura, a magistrate heading home from a banquet. They all felt the pull of these invisible cords marking the hours. With sundials asleep and the shadow of the gnomon gone, Romans reached for instruments that listened to water. A clepsydra, a water clock, stood on a table like a thoughtful jar, sometimes bronze, sometimes terracotta, sometimes a carved stone basin set in a wooden frame. Within it, water rose or fell through a narrow throat at a steady pace. Some were outflow clocks, the water slipping away while a marked scale on the inner wall revealed the passage of time. Others were inflow designs, a vessel filling slowly from a constant trickle, while a float lifted a needle along a column etched with hour marks. The more sophisticated models wore 2 or even 12 scales, one for each month, because the Romans recognized that a summer hour was not the same creature as a winter hour. At night, when the length of darkness swelled and shrank across the year, the keeper would rotate the clepsydra to the correct scale, or consult the proper column before announcing that the first watch had ended and the second had begun. If you were to sit quietly in a station of the vigils, the city's firefighters and watchmen, you might hear the soft metronomic language of this clock, the patient drip, the almost inaudible hiss of water sliding through the throat, a slave leaning close to read the gleam on the scale by lamplight. When the water reached the mark, a guard shook the next man gently awake. No bell rang out over Rome. There were no great clocks to toll the hour. Time moved by touch and breath, the weight of a hand on a shoulder, the brief murmur of a password, sandals laced, a cloak gathered, a door's leather hinge flexing as it opened to the street. In military camps outside the city, the change of watches could be signalled with a buccina, a curved brass horn whose voice rolled low and certain over rows of tents. But within Rome the soundscape was softer, more domestic. The night marked itself. The Romans had a vocabulary for every fold of darkness. There was concubium, the quiet period after dinner when most households withdrew. There was intempesta nox, the deep middle when the streets thinned and the gods seemed closest. There was galicinium, the cock-crow which hovered in the last part of the 3rd watch and the first of the 4th. Then came duluculum, the delicate unsealing of dawn, and prima luce, first light, when the city inhaled. These names were not merely poetic labels, they were practical coordinates. A contract might specify delivery by prima luce. A letter could be sent with a runner instructed to depart at Galicinium to catch the cool, last stretch of the night road. A priest might schedule a rite just after duluculum, when the air was new and clean. In homes, timekeeping was intimate. A household that could afford it owned a small clepsydra, its rim burnished by years of fingers adjusting the lid, its base ringed with faint mineral crust the colour of chalk. The steward regulated the servants' tasks by it, how long the brazier should be watched, when to change the wick in the lamp, when to rouse the master if an early departure was planned. The dripping encouraged quiet. Voices lowered around it instinctively, as people hush in the presence of someone sleeping. In more modest rooms, people read the night by habit and by sky. Experienced eyes learned the arc of the moon over a familiar roofline, the angle of stars above a particular chimney. An old woman could glance through a shutter and tell her granddaughter, "Third watch now. Go and check the bread." Courts made a sport of time. In the daylight, an orator's speech might be strictly measured by a clepsydra set on the rostra, the water's slow descent limiting eloquence more effectively than any impatient magistrate. The practice bled into night work as well. A cohort of the vigils dispatched to investigate a warehouse took the time of a speech to examine ledgers and seals. A night delivery was permitted to block a lane only for 2 fillings of the clepsydra. In a city without mechanical clocks, law and routine hitched themselves to water's steady patience. Shops learned the watches too. Because wheeled traffic was largely banned during the day inside Rome's crowded streets, cart drivers waited for the dim safety of the second and third watches to enter. You could pace your own night by the rumble of iron-rimmed wheels and the grunt of oxen passing your doorway. First came amphorae of Betacan oil, then baskets of leafy greens from gardens beyond the walls, then sacks of grain rolling toward the Horia by the river. The carts taught bakers when to stoke their ovens, millers when to start their stones, porters when to knot their shoulder pads. If you lay in an upper room of an insula in the Subura, you might count the passing loads like a slow constellation: olives, cabbages, grain, timber, and then, near Gallicinium, the charcoal man, his cart whispering black dust. Astronomers and astrologers kept their own clocks in the sky. The patient tracking of planets across the zodiac, the rising of bright Arcturus, the pre-dawn glitter of Venus, these were signals as trustworthy as any measuring jar. A client might climb a creaking stair to a rooftop terrace where a learned Greek waited with wax tablets, his lamp shaded, his eye on the eastern horizon. The interview itself was a sort of timed rite. A reading concluded before the onset of the 4th watch, an offering promised at first light. Meanwhile, the family below stirred once to feed a child or tend a candle, then settled again to the rustle of straw and the thin perfume of olive oil burning in a clay lamp. Even the city's sacred heart breathed by the watches. In the house of the Vestals, a priestess traced the curve of an iron tool through embers, at intervals learned through long habit, often enough to keep Vesta's fire eager, not so often as to waste wood. A junior priest, wiping sleep from his eyes, checked a clepsydra against the bright rim still living in the ash. In certain temples, doors were unbarred at Primalus, and so a porter in the 3rd watch put on his sandals and tested the hinges while bats still worked the air beneath the eaves. Because the night's hours expanded and contracted with the seasons, Romans cultivated a calendar sense inside their bodies. At Rome's latitude, a daylight hour could drift from roughly 3/4 of an hour in winter to more than an hour in summer. People felt that drift. A merchant accustomed to closing his accounts during the 2nd watch in winter might finish them during the 1st in summer and keep to the same inner rhythm. Time in Rome was not a unit stamped from metal. It was leather, cut to fit, worn to shape, supple in the hand. It is soothing to notice how much trust this system required. Trust in the person minding the clock and not dozing past the mark. Trust in the man who measured the flow of water and etched the hours carefully on the vessel, in the potter who made the jar smooth enough that the trickle would not snag, in the slave who trimmed the lamp to a steady flame so the reader could see the scale. Trust in the moon to rise where it should, in roosters to announce the coming light, in the cocksure certainty that the world would be waiting at Primalus, baths warming, bread browning, the forum stones cooling after their long night under the stars. If you walk slowly through this Rome after dark, what you carry with you is not a chiming clock, but a sense of sequence. The 1st watch is for returning home from dinner, for locking doors, for stories told on thresholds while lamps smoke. The 2nd is for carts and careful work, for copying letters and polishing metal, for the easy talk of night shift companions. The 3rd is for the city's deep maintenance, the baker's heat, The furnaces of the baths, the steady patrol of the vigils, the lifting of amphorae to quiet shelves, and the fourth watches for beginnings that pretend to be endings, offerings before dawn, runners sent ahead of the sun, the first cough of a brazier as someone in a cold room strikes flint and thinks of the day. Time here is not a number but a procession, and the water that counts it slips away so gently you only notice its passing when you realise with a small start that the sky to the east has turned the faintest shade of pearl. When the sun slipped away and the streets turned to pools of shadow, Rome did not brighten with rows of street lamps. There was no public grid of light waiting to flicker on. Night belonged to darkness, broken only by small human islands of flame. The orange bloom of a torch, the steady bead of an oil lamp, the soft halo of a shuttered lantern. People learned to travel from glow to glow the way sailors coast from beacon to beacon, and they carried their own daylight with them. Torches were the blunt instrument of illumination, simple, bright, and smoky. A servant could knot strips of cloth around a stick and soak them in tallow, but the sturdier choice was a pine stave whose resin bled easily into flame. Resinous wood burned hot and threw a lively light, though it spat, crackled, and shed sparks that made housewives nervous and the city watch attentive. Processions favoured them. Weddings, with their joking songs and bright bridal torches. Funeral corteges moving slowly toward the gates. Certain festivals that wound through the streets with lines of fire like a moving necklace. Torches announced themselves from far away, but they demanded attention. Hands to hold, men to mind, ash to sweep, and a keen eye for stray embers near wooden balconies and fabric shop awnings. For ordinary evenings, the Romans preferred smaller, more obedient light, the oil lamp, the lucerna. A common lamp sat neatly in the palm, moulded in clay by the tens of thousands. The form is familiar, an oval body to hold oil, a short nozzle for the flame, a filling hole in the centre, and often a handle or lug to grip. The top, the discus, became a canvas. Potters stamped dolphins, theatre masks, chariots, gladiators, vine scrolls, even little scenes from myths. Later, Christian buyers found lamps marked with a shiro or a fish. Makers stamped their names on the base too, signatures of workshops that shipped lamps as far as Britain and North Africa. Bronze versions gleamed in richer houses, sometimes shaped like animals with the flame licking from a beak or a lion's mouth, hung on chains from ceiling hooks or perched on elegant tripod stands. Fuel mattered. Olive oil was the standard, and Rome swallowed it in astonishing quantities. Great round-shouldered amphorae, the heavy Dressel 20 jars, arrived from Spain and North Africa like a slow tide, their bellies full of oil meant for kitchens, baths, offerings and lamps. Households burned the cheaper grades for lighting. Fine, fresh oil belonged on the table. The smell of a lamp depended on what you poured into it. Good oil burned with a sweeter breath. Old or adulterated oil smoked and left a black rind on plastered ceilings. Wicks were little lessons in materials. A twist of linen, a roll of papyrus, a braid of rush. A well-trimmed wick drew oil smoothly and gave a steady flame. A neglected one mushroomed into a sooty bulb and gobbled fuel. This is why you often find small bronze tools near ancient lamps. Prickers to tease the wick forward, tweezers to nip it, spoons and funnels to top up the reservoir without spilling. Keeping a lamp was like tending a tiny, polite hearth. One lamp does not make a room bright in the modern sense. An olive oil flame glows softly, enough to thread a needle with patience, enough to read if you sit close and angle the discus just so. Many tasks arrange themselves around that fact. Readers chose a place near the light and learned to rest the eyes. Scribes worked with a lamp to their left to keep their writing hand from casting a shadow. Taverns set several lamps along a shelf to spread the glow and make dice and cups visible on the counter. Shops placed a lamp by the door as a sign of welcome and safety, its circle of light falling onto the threshold where customers tested fruit, counted out coins, or read the chalked price of stew and bread at a thermopolium. Lanterns were lamps made travel-worthy. A carpenter built a small frame of wood or bronze and set translucent panels into it, so the wind could not bully the flame. Glass panes were possible but costly. Far more common were thin sheets of shaved horn that glowed like warm parchment, or laminae of a mineral the Romans called lapis specularis, mica-like stones split into windows. The result was a quiet, sheltered light that could swing from a hook on a pole or from a servant's hand without coughing out at the first gust on a corner. Wealthier households appointed a torchbearer, a lanternarius, to walk ahead at night. In crowded neighbourhoods, the little box of cream-coloured light was also a kind of passport, announcing that someone expected to pass safely and be seen doing so. Candles existed but spoke a different language. The cheap kind, tallow, with its greasy smoke and low melting point, was serviceable for quick chores and poor pockets. Beeswax burned cleaner and smelled faintly sweet. It stood upright, kept a reliable edge on the flame, and cost enough to mark the user's means. During Saturnalia, the midwinter festival of upside-down customs and gifts, people exchanged wax tapers, and banquet tables glittered with ranks of them. Little suns in domed dining rooms painted with stars. Yet for most of the year, in most places, the household lamp remained the workhorse. Light and safety were always entangled. In a city of timber stairs and tight courtyards, a dropped torch or a carelessly overfilled lamp could mean char and ruin. After the Great Fire in Nero's time, building rules pushed Rome towards safer habits, wider streets, more masonry. But the everyday discipline of flame mattered more. Families placed lamps in niches or on broad-based stands so a sleeve would not brush them. Merchants snuffed the door lamp before dragging a wool awning across the shop front. An innkeeper told a drowsy guest to hand over the lamp before sleep. The vigils patrolled for more than thieves. They watched for firelight licking where it shouldn't, fined taverns that left torches near hanging reeds, and carried hooks to pull down burning timbers if the worst began. Because light was precious, darkness remained a companion rather than an enemy. Romans knew how to move in it. They let their pupils widen. They measured familiar lanes by the feel of paving joints under a sandal and the scent of a nearby bakery's vent. They kept to porticos where columns framed pockets of safety and where shrine lamps, always tended, offered a fixed star. In courtyards, a single flame under the household gods made a deep, comforting gloom around it instead of banishing the night outright. Evening had its own ceremony, the lucinarium, the hour of lighting. Someone poured oil, someone struck flint, someone lifted a wick to drink the first tiny teardrop of fire, and the day turned a page. Workshops adapted their craft to the shadows. A jeweller might sit with a lens on a string and a lamp just beyond his fingers, turning a ring slowly so the metal caught the light the same way each time. A barber placed his customer with the cheek to the flame to chase faint stubble. Fullers who cleaned garments by day stored amphorae and stirred vats after dusk. Lamps ranked along beams like small moons. The baths, though closed to bathers at night, glowed in their bellies. Furnace men fed the hippocaust and worked by lamps set in wall niches, their flames mirrored and multiplied in polished bronze tools. If you stood on the Palatine and looked down at night, you would not have seen a sea of light. You would have seen constellations. Here, the bright cluster of a banquet, multiple lamps and a few proud candles stepping across a triclinium. There, a string of shop doorways, each with its bead of fire drawing a line along a street like the Milky Way broken into pieces. Farther away, a thread of lanterns moving with a group of porters, and in the forum 2 or 3 fixed points that never slept. The great hearth of Vesta within its house, and a temple lamp before a god who, like the city, was expected to keep watch. Even the economy of light left traces. Soot from lamps, lamp-black, was gathered by artisans and mixed with gum to make ink for books and letters. Spent oil was strained for the roughest tasks. Broken lamp nozzles show up in the archaeological record because the place nearest the flame wore out and cracked first. In Pompeii and Ostia, Archaeologists find wall hooks for hanging lamps at shoulder height, drip trays to catch oil, and stands with several branches, ancestors of chandeliers that turned one reservoir into a bloom of flames when guests arrived. Reading by lamp had a reputation, comforting, intimate, and a little hard on the eyes. Writers mention the smoke and the way a lamp can make the margins of a page swim if the wick is not right. But there is tenderness in those scenes too. The hush of a study, the small scratched sound of a stylus on wax, the neat shadow of a hand, and the knowledge that the light you're using was grown in groves on distant hills and shipped across winter seas to glow for you for an hour. Outside the walls, travellers trusted lanterns and the moon. Post stations along the great roads kept a few lamps for late arrivals. Stable boys learned to shade a flame with a palm while buckling straps. Caravan leaders timed departures to catch the long, quiet reach of the third watch, when the night is settled and the wind gentle. A poorly shuttered lantern taught lessons fast. The first burst of countryside wind could pluck out the flame and leave a road suddenly wider, a ditch suddenly deeper. So panes were checked, wicks trimmed, oil tested, and a spare lamp kept wrapped in cloth. In the end, light in Rome was not about defeating night. It was about placing careful points within it, portable suns with rules and manners, a flame that small asks for attention, and people gave it gladly. A nudge of wick, a drop more oil, a hand to shield it at a doorway, a patient eye on the shadows beyond its reach. The city's landmarks changed character in that company. Marble did not blaze, it glowed like bone. Bronze statues lost their public bravado and became almost conversational, faces flickering as if they might answer. Columns stepped out of darkness one by one as you passed, like friends arriving late but warmly expected, and everywhere the same quiet choreography repeated itself. Strike, catch, sip, steady, until the lamps had said all they could say, and the cock on some rooftop announced the world was turning toward the light again. They called them the men who watched while others slept. When night drew its heavy breath over the city, a door inside each station opened, and the first patrol stepped into the street with the slow confidence of people who knew every stone by touch. The cry they feared and trained for could rise from any quarter. Ignis, a single word that could drive wind through 1,000 hearts, from attic tenants to senators jolted awake by smoke. Their answer was practice, tools, and a map of Rome that lived in their bodies. Augustus had woven them into the fabric of the capital, the way a careful tailor stitches a lining. 7 cohorts, spread across the 14 regions so that each cohort guarded 2. A prefect commanded the whole corps. Tribunes handled cohorts. Centurions kept sentries tight and quick. Many of the rankers were freedmen, men who knew the weight of work and wanted the steady wage and status that came with service. Over time, citizens served beside them. The uniform, belt, short cloak, tools clinking at the hip, made them a single species after dark. Inside a station house, the excubitorium, the first thing you noticed was not grandeur but readiness. Hooks hung like orderly claws. Buckets stood stacked in towers, their rims rubbed smooth by hands. Coiled ropes sat on pegs, and ladders leaned against a wall so they could be seized at a run. Near the back, the prized engines waited, hand-pumped siphons, bronze-bellied and shining where many cloths had polished them. A team could wheel one out on its cart, drop the suction hose into a cistern, fountain or barrel, and with 2 men on each rocking handle send a steady arc of water hissing onto a roof or into a window. A separate bench held thick, stitched quilts, the centones, kept damp so they could be thrown over sparks and doorways. Vinegar jars stood near them. Some swore the sour soak smothered fire better than water alone. The men knew their water the way a miller knows flour. The city's aqueducts fed a web of distribution tanks and fountains, Castella and Lacus, spilling into street basins where anyone could draw. Patrols traced their routes from basin to basin, learning which ones silted up, which ran weak at night, where a hidden cistern waited behind a tavern, where a well had gone brackish. When a blaze started, that knowledge could shorten the fire by half a street. If the nearest fountain chattered only a thin ribbon, they ran the hose another 30 paces to a better head, or formed a bucket chain to the Tiber, where dark water slapped at the stone stairs and gave itself up by the rope pull. Their nights were divided by watches, their work by rhythms. Early hours were for inspection. 2 or 3 men would walk the alley behind a row of tabernets and feel for warmth on walls after shutters had come down. They checked that shopkeepers had pulled the torches from lintels, that a brazier was not still sulking under a workbench. They exchanged nods with doorkeepers, moved gamblers out of an archway so they could pass with the ladder, and warned a bawdy peppina to keep its lamps away from a reed awning. In the 2nd and 3rd watches the carts came. The wheeled traffic, largely banned by day, pushed into night, and the vigils directed their flow the way a shepherd leans a flock along a hillside. A hand lifted, a lantern angled, a voice low but firm. Wait there, take the next lane, mind that corner where a staircase juts. They were not just fighting fire, they were preventing it with 100 small courtesies enforced without fuss. The alarm could come from anywhere. Sometimes it was the true cry from a rooftop, a woman's voice sharper than fear. Ignis. Other times it arrived as smell, singed chaff, resin hotter than it should be, the wrong kind of smoke sliding out from under a door. Word travelled faster than feet. A runner went from the nearest patrol to the station, and the station to neighbouring cohorts if the wind was up and the houses dry. The door burst open, and the stored readiness became motion. One team with the siphon and hose, one with hooks and axes, one with ladders and quilts, and always a pair to watch the roofline for the leap of new flame. The pump crew moved like rowers, swapping out the tired hands every few minutes so the jet never thinned. Others hauled buckets, passing them palm to palm with the rhythm of a song. Hooks found rafters and dragged burning timber clear so it could be drowned in the gutter. If a wall threatened to carry the fire down a block, the officer made the hard call to pull it down, tearing a hole to stop a city from becoming a torch. They were not gentle, but they were careful. In a crowded insula, panic could kill as cleanly as flame. The watch forced stairwells to flow one way, down. One man counted those who came out, another listened at doors with the back of his fingers for heat, and then kicked through if it was safe. Children went to the bucket line to carry small loads. Old men were parked by the hose to shout if the stream slackened. A scribble of names on a wax tablet kept families from losing each other in the smoke. In the aftermath, the same tablet recorded the negligent, the shopkeeper who left a brazier near straw, the tenant who stored oil jars on a stair, the ironsmith whose forge screen had holes big enough to throw sparks. Fines were practical teaching, dear enough to be remembered. There were quiet rescues too. A cat coaxed from a roof by a man with beef in his pocket, because a child below could not be moved until she saw it safe. A chest of contracts dragged into the street and covered with a wet quilt while a merchant gagged on smoke and tried to thank everyone at once. A mattress pitched out of a window and caught on a centonaise stretched tight, because someone inside could not find the stair. Things were saved because hands were ready in the dark, not because the fire respected rank or prayer. When the flames died and the rubble steamed, the station turned from attack to care. The injured were washed and smeared with oil and honey, bandaged with torn linen, soot wiped from eyes with the corner of a damp cloth. The exhausted were given water first, then a mouthful of wine. Sentries stayed to watch for the ugly habit a fire has of thinking better of itself and returning. A small chalk mark near a doorway, 2 strokes and a dot, told the next patrol to check this place again before dawn. The smell of wet ash hung in the lanes, and men sat with their backs against a wall, eyes half shut, ears still tuned for the hiss that says a coal is chewing through something soft like fibre or straw. Because they owned the night, they became the city's practical conscience after dark. They broke up tavern fights before knives made fools of tempers. They stopped a pair of youths from scraping pitch from an amphora with a torch too close. They questioned the porter pushing a barrow loaded with small bronze heads at the wrong hour, and learned, with a sigh, that a sculptor's studio had been light-fingered. A patrol might walk a widow home from a shrine just because it was decent and because they could. They checked the locks at a granary door and made the sign on the hinge that showed it had been found secure. They wove respect into routine so that most nights ended with nothing but footprints and a few quiet warnings given. Their authority was light but real. Edilician regulations gave them the teeth to fine and the duty to prevent, and the city's building laws, tightened after disasters, gave them a lever. Height limits on insulae meant ladders could reach. Requirements for firewalls and party walls in masonry meant a blaze could be boxed. Instructions to keep clear space around kilns and smithies meant that a door opening would not breathe a workshop into a neighbourhood. The Vigiles were the ones who walked these rules into being, block by block, evening by evening, until they were simply how people lived. Training filled the spaces between alarms. In the courtyard, a century's worth of shouted practice layered into the stone. New men learned how fast a thatch roof takes flame, and how to climb a ladder with a hook on a cord without tangling it in their feet. They practiced the bucket line with amphorae filled to different levels so the weight surprised no one in a crisis. They learned to swing a hooked pole not like a hammer but like a lever, small motion, big effect, so timbers came toward you safely instead of into you dangerously. Most of all, they were taught to read roofs the way sailors read waves, which tiles were already scorched and loose, where the joists would go if they fell, where a person might be if a shout came muffled through smoke. The city taught them too. In Trastevere, where lanes kinked and turned, a team learned to wedge the pump cart just so at a corner, the hose passing under a balcony to reach a stubborn loft. Near the Aventine's riverfront, they honed a different skill. How to move a line fast when grain dust hangs in the air. A dust that can make flame leap the way a thought leaps a pause. Around the forum, the patrols walked under colonnades and through porticos, exchanging nods with temple attendants and letting their eyes stay up, always up, where a lamplight in the wrong place could sketch the outline of tomorrow's trouble on a pediment. The men themselves were pieces of the city's story. A pump tender might know a bit of Greek from a childhood in a household where he was owned, then freed. Now he counted beats for the handles. 1, 2, change, so the jet never faltered. A centurion with a soldier's back carried a gentler face into a tenement, because he had learned that people run straight toward a man who looks like he knows what to do. A clerk in the station kept the rolls, tallied fines, and wrote letters to families when a man was hurt badly enough to be sent home. Their pay was modest, their kit humble, but there was pride here, the quiet kind that prefers function to fanfare. They love certain sounds, the solid clack when a ladder foot finds the proper biting place, the deep, satisfied breath a pump takes when the hose seals well, the slap of a bucket placed not thrown into the next set of hands, the sigh a crowd makes when the orange inside a window goes down a shade and people know that this at least will end. They also hated certain sounds, the high quick chatter of fire inside hollow walls, the frantic bleat of a goat tied too near a blaze, the brittle snap that tells you a floor beam has given up. They filed these in the same mental drawer as addresses and alley shortcuts, because in their work a sound could be a map as useful as a plan scratched on wax. On some nights, nothing dramatic happened at all. A patrol walked the Subura at a pace that said everything was fine, lantern lights slipping over graffiti and the rough reliefs on corner shrines. A boy sleeping in a doorway snored and turned his face from the glow. A baker's apprentice laughed once, quietly, at something his master said about dough that rises the way good fortune does. Slowly, if at all, then all at once. In the excubatorium, a water clock marked the end of a watch. A nod passed from the waking to the waking again. The city coasted toward dawn, and the men who kept it from burning sat for a moment on a bench polished by decades of tired backs and listened for the sound of trouble that did not come. When morning finally pressed pale fingers between roofs, they returned their tools to their places with the satisfaction of people who had once again kept calamity theoretical. buckets upside down to dry. Hooks on their pegs, points oiled. The pump handles lashed so they would not swing when no hands were on them. A note left for the day officers about a tavern to be fined, a stair to be repaired, a fountain to be cleared of grit. Then a cup of something hot, bread still warm from a neighbour's oven, and the ordinary miracle of an unspectacular city, ready for another day because hundreds of men had guarded the ordinary through the night. If you follow one of them out the door as the shift ends, you see a person with stiff shoulders and a calm step, someone who knows how quickly luck can turn and how often preparation prevents the need for luck. He squints into the new light and tucks the lantern's shutter closed. Behind him, the station breathes in, folding its readiness back into stillness. Ahead, Rome begins to clatter and call. The men of the night watch are not celebrated in marble, but the streets they kept from becoming ash run straight and busy in the morning, and that is monument enough. Slip with me into the Subura as twilight loosens the knots of the day. This district sits in a shallow bowl between the slopes of the Esquiline, Viminal, and Quirinal, a web of streets braided together by steps, alleys, and sudden courtyards. By reputation it is boisterous and rough. By reality it is simply full of people, trades, smells, and stories that lean from one window to the next. When the last glow fades from the roof tiles, shutters tilt, lamps wake, and the neighbourhood reassembles itself for the night shift. Along the main lanes, shop fronts still breathe heat. A brazier clicks as its coals settle. A thermopolium, the hot food counter with its big terracotta jars set into stone, scoops out stew that has been thickening all afternoon. Lentils flecked with herbs, pork cooked down to softness, olives, and a heel of bread torn from a rack that came warm from the baker only an hour ago. Wine arrives in clay mugs, watered, with a little resin on the nose and a price low enough that a bricklayer can buy a second without wrinkling his forehead. At the corner, a barber collapses his three-legged stool. He has shaved faces in the doorway all day to catch the light, but now he sweeps hair into a neat pile and hands a last customer a small mirror to admire a line cut clean along the neck. Above all this, literally above, stands the insula, the Roman apartment house. The ground floor presents tabernae, those vaulted shops with wide mouths. Some have a back room where the family sleeps, others open into stairwells that climb to rental units stacked higher and higher. Landlords learned long ago that the air grows cheaper with height. On the first floor you might find a spacious set of rooms with a tiny balcony and a real kitchen hearth. A weaver who has done well, a scribal family, a retired soldier. Higher up, the rooms shrink, ceilings drop, and the walls thin until they seem to trade warmth with the night. Cooking is done on portable braziers. Water is hauled upstairs skin by skin, and winter winds find every gap. The city tried to keep a lid on this. Height limits decreed, inspections threatened, rules tightened after fires. But the pressure of 1 million lives in a tight bowl has its own logic. Listen at a stairwell and you will hear the whole building at once. A baby claims a corner of the air and then releases it. A woman scolds gently but with force enough to make her words useful. A pair of dice clack on a wooden board where two porters, off work until before dawn, play for beans and pride. Someone knocks on a door with the rhythm the friends all use. In the stair shadow, the doorkeeper sits on a stool with a lamp at his feet. He knows who is late and why, who slid the rent under the threshold at the first of the month, who needs a word of warning because the landlord's agent, a narrow man with a narrow face to match, came by in the afternoon and folded his lips in a particular way. The Subura runs on trades that never exactly stop. Fullers beat and cleaned garments with water, clay and urine. The sharp ammonia bite hangs over their shops even at night. They leave jars at street corners to catch what passers-by can offer. By evening the jars are gathered inside, lids tied with twine, and the floor is hosed down with bucket after bucket while two boys laugh and splash each other with their sandals. The dyer next door sets lamps high on the wall. He turns skeins on a frame, making sure the blue settles evenly, because tomorrow morning a cloth merchant will demand to see the colour in daylight, and it had better hold. A metal worker's hammer strokes change character after dark. Lighter, more listening, because now he is truing edges and fitting small hinges, not forging bars that shudder the whole lane. Food is everywhere, because hunger keeps time differently at night. A woman with a tray of figs calls out softly. The sweetness rose to the first bite when the heat dropped, she promises, and it is true. A boy offers little packets of garum, the fish sauce that tastes of anchovy sun and salt. Enough for one pot of stew for those who want to eat well without buying a jar. At a window, a grandmother spoons out farro porridge to grandchildren who sit with their legs swinging into the room. The spoons clink in the bowl with a sound that means bedtime soon. In an upstairs room, a couple unrolls their bedding on a platform with a woven reed surface. They tuck a jar of olives and a crust under the edge for the hungry moment that is sure to come at mid-watch. The street teaches you to keep to its edges. Porticos along some blocks provide a roofed path. Columns step the night into safer pieces. Crossroad shrines, compita, hold their own little hearths to the household gods of the neighbourhood. The smoke rises while a man murmurs a few words before taking his delivery cart toward the river. On the corner where three alleys meet, a guild of muleteers keeps a bench. They do not own much, but they own this bench. At night they mend harness, swap news from the road, and assign loads for the dark hours when carts may run. You will notice that the bench sits beneath a window, where a lamp is always kept. The woman who lives there is a widow with a blunt tongue, and a respect most men would like to rent for a while. She keeps an eye for them. They keep an eye for her. Danger, when it comes, prefers what is soft, dry, and stacked closely. Straw, timber, rope, and gossip. Everyone knows this. The Vigils may be the night's official guardians, but the Subura is good at guarding itself. A lamp is placed on the widest shelf. The wicks are trimmed short. A shutter is pulled across the brazier if a family must sleep with embers alive. Roof terraces, where people keep herbs in pots and let laundry drink the sun, stay clear of kindling. Even children learn to point with urgency at a hint of smoke. When a cry goes up, neighbours split their roles without talking. One runs for the station, one throws dampened quilts over a doorway, two form a bucket line from the nearest fountain where water never quite stops singing. Afterwards there is the same ritual every time, a quick census, a count of damage and saved things, a shared bowl of something hot. The night forgives much. It never forgives carelessness with flame. Water is a nightly labour. Aqueducts feed public fountains. Private pipes, if you are lucky enough to have them, serve only the ground floor. So water carriers shoulder skins up stair after stair. They learn to rest at the same turn on each flight, where the breeze finds the gap by the stair window, where the plaster is cool. They know which tenants underpay, and which give a fig or a cup of watered wine without being asked. In some buildings, a steward makes a schedule and chalks a mark beside each door as the jars are filled. On steep nights, those hot ones when the air sits like a cat and refuses to be moved, the carriers work past midnight, because everyone drinks and everyone wants to splash their face before sleep. Noise belongs to the Subura the way the river belongs to its banks. You think you will never sleep here, but the body learns. It learns to expect the deep rumble of carts in the second watch, because wheeled traffic is mostly banned by day. It learns the call and answer of men guiding axle around axle in a tight lane. It learns a repertoire of hawkers' voices that turn into lullabies. Chickpea cellar, hot chestnuts, cinnamon water, small loaves, fried fish. It learns the small thunder of an upstairs neighbour going to and from the chamber pot, and the steeper sound of that pot being emptied into the street for the gutter to catch, with a warning shout first, always with a shout. It learns that the quiet after the third watch is real and can be trusted. Politics and poetry drop in and out of these rooms without ceremony. The bookseller's street, the Argulitum, funnels ideas from the forum up toward this quarter, and by evening a copied page of a new satire might already be pinned at a shop for customers to glance at between purchases. Literate neighbours read out loud to those leaning in the doorway, a squib about a senator's affectations, a lovely few lines on a fig tree's patient shade, a grumble about landlords that makes everyone laugh with a lack of surprise you can feel. A boy repeats a riddle he heard near the forum and makes it his own. A girl carries a line of song up the stair, breaking it into pieces so her breath will last to the top. Religion tastes like ordinary life here. Household shrines get a pinch of incense at the moment when lamps are lit. Someone thanks the Lares not for grand victories, but for a shoe that did not split, a toothache that went away, a good price for wood. Foreign gods find homes in rented rooms. Isis whose sistrum faintly chimes, a small Mithric tauroctony tucked behind a curtain in a cellar, a Syrian goddess with a painted eye that seems to follow you up the stair. No one is surprised. The Sabura is a mouth that has learned how to eat every spice and like them all. There are courtyards you do not notice until someone points them out. Spaces behind houses where craftsmen share tools, where a vine climbs a wall, where a single fig tree stretches like a friend trying to make himself bigger to shelter more people. Children chase each other there, skidding on dust. The game's rules flexible enough to admit a 4-year-old who refuses to be left out. A weaver's loom ticks in the doorway. The rhythm is soothing and speaks of rent paid. A painter lays red lines on a rough wall in the light of 2 lamps set on the floor. Where he is neat, a room becomes richer without a coin being spent. There is vice, of course, but it seldom bothers to hide. A brothel advertises by keeping its door open and letting its lamp burn longer. A runner's boy will walk a stranger to it for a fee. Gambling dens murmur darker, and if a dice game grows too loud, a neighbour coughs once. If the cough is not heard, the watch hears instead. The Edile's men pass through sometimes, measuring weights, sniffing for spoiled fish, weighing bread loaves to be sure a hungry city is not being cheated. When they leave, the shopkeepers stand a little taller and pretend not to. Law here is not a distant bronze tablet. It is the habit of fairness practiced enough to become custom. The air is a ledger of smells: warm bread and hot oil, bruised mint, wet wool, leather, smoke, urine near a fuller's shop, crushed laurel where someone swept too briskly and made a scent for the lane, tar from a wheelmaker's bench. You taste it when you breathe. For some, it is proof that they live too many to a block. For others, it is proof they live in the middle of the Empire's beating chest. In winter, the smells tighten. In summer, they unfurl and wander up the stairs ahead of you like friendly dogs. Stories attached to corners. The corner where an old soldier from the Rhine tells children about snow that squeaks underfoot and stars that seem sharper. The corner where an old woman keeps a basket of worn sandals and fits them to feet for a coin and a blessing. The corner where a vendor sold watered wine to a poet every evening for a decade, and then did not open one night, and everyone who walked by slowed without meaning to. The Sabura remembers these things better than monuments do. It keeps memorials in the form of habits. Watch the rhythm of sleep. On the first floor, a merchant falls asleep fast, sated with stew and wine, his money box under his bed and his hand on the box. On the third, a woman who mends cloaks for the watch pricks her finger and sucks it absent-mindedly, before putting needle and thread carefully into the bowl she keeps for work. She ties the bowl in cloth and hangs it from a peg so mice will not learn a taste for linen. On the roof, 2 boys lie like starfish with a blanket pulled to their chins and whisper about how big the moon must be if it looks that large from here. In the alley, a dog sighs and takes up the job of listening to what humans miss. If you were to stay until the last watch, you would see the Subura turn itself outward again. Bakers open their mouths to the street first, sliding fresh loaves onto boards that make the air soft. A bath attendant rattles a pail against a wall to wake the furnace man below. The water carrier knocks once and lets himself in to fill jars without waking the household. He has learned which door squeaks and which steps complain, and how to step over the sad board that always whines. A woman lights the lamp at the family shrine and warms her hands near it for a moment longer than the task requires. Her breath makes the flame lean, and then it steadies itself. and then the street, quite suddenly, is daytime again. And although the Subura earned its reputation for chaos from those who visited briefly and decided quickly, staying a whole night shows something else. An order nested inside disorder, a small discipline attached to every small risk. 1,000 accommodations people make with each other so that a great many can live where space says fewer should. In the long shadow between sunset and dawn, the insula feel less like towers of tinder and more like beehives, cells eased close, voices humming, heat well used, and work passed from hand to hand until the city is ready for morning. The Forum lies in a shallow valley between the Capitoline and the Palatine, and when night settles it gathers the cool like a bowl. The last noise of the courts has already run downhill and away. Litigants, clients, petitioners, and the men who make their living with a quick tongue and a good memory. What remains is stone, bronze, and a handful of people whose business is to keep watch over both. Moonlight spreads in long, quiet sheets across the paving, catching the edges of letters on dedications and turning them pale. Where the slabs shine, you can see the faint hollows worn by centuries of sandals. Where the stone darkens, moisture has risen and holds the day's heat like a secret. A few steps off the Via Sacra, the little round temple that belongs to the city more intimately than any palace glows from within. It is not a conquering building, it is the size of a promise. Inside, the sacred hearth burns with a steady living breath, and the night shifts around it. The priestesses who tend this fire move softly in the next building, the long house with its colonnaded courts and fountains. A junior guardian sits near the threshold with a lamp shaded by her hand to keep the flame from thinking it is more important than the one in the shrine. She checks the embers by habit rather than clock, a rhythm learned with years. Coax, spread, feed, listen. The tools at her side, iron rake, small bronze ladle, brush of twigs bound tight, clink once, and then settle. A pot of clean water stands near, drawn earlier from a source kept for holy use, because water and fire are the only honest ways to amend a night that suddenly goes wrong. Behind her, the statues of past chief priestesses line the peristyle, their faces steady in the oblique light, names and years cut into the bases like a calm calendar of a single duty repeated again and again. If the city is a body, this is its pulse, and the rest of the Forum arranges itself around that heartbeat. The dark bulk of the Curia stands closed and square, its bronze fittings asleep, its benches inside cool and empty. Senators will fill it again after sunrise, but for now even the echoes are off duty. Along the northern edge, the Basilica Aemilia stretches with the patience of a portico that has watched fashions come and go. Sweepers have passed earlier with stiff brooms, and the floor holds a faint, clean scratch-mark sheen. Across the way, the Basilica Julia answers with its own rank of columns, where, at dusk, a clerk folded the last wax tablet shut and breathed on the stylus to soften a ridge before slipping it into a pouch. Between them, the rostra sits like a beached ship, its famous prows, once the noses of captured vessels dull in the dark, the carved edges of victories turned harmless by lack of sun. If you climb it now, the stone gives back the small sounds you make, and your voice goes out into a listening space that does not judge content, only presence. At the west end, the columns of Saturn stand like careful fingers holding up a small slab of night. Behind them, in rooms that were once both strongbox and ledger of the state, the treasury sleeps. The walls have watched consuls come and go, wars paid for, debts reckoned, public bronze tallied and retallied. By day, men with sharp reeds and ink the colour of winter smoke move through that space. By night, it is a cool box that keeps the city's promises. The god in the cellar is bound with wool for most of the year, a reminder of what must be restrained, and unbound during the winter feast that bears his name, when even time loosens its belt and the streets laugh in a different key. On these steps, just to one side, a small marker tells you where all roads are counted from, the place the Empire measured itself against. The slab is unassuming in the dark, a milestone disguised as a stone you could rest your hand on. But couriers, merchants and magistrates carry its mathematics in their heads when they leave the city at dawn. Walk a little and the three tall columns of the Twin Horsemen's temple cut the sky. In daylight they glitter. At night they take on a spare anatomical beauty. Flutes crisp with shadow, capitals like crowns that forgot to boast. The platform has its own quiet stories, standard weights and measures once kept here to check the honesty of scales, proclamations read out to a square that answered with a human tide. Now a temple keeper crosses with a lantern and a key, checks a lock with the touch that comes from opening the same door 1,000 times, and disappears inside for a count that only he needs to know. The long street that runs like a clean bone through the Forum, the sacred way, keeps its grandeur even when it empties. At the eastern end, the triumphal arch that remembers a stern victory throws a black shape across the paving. Farther west, another arch, heavy with carved captives and stacked gods, frames the slope of the Capitoline, where the cliff face turns night into a wall. Between them, the open places hold small anchors. The umbilicus urbis sits like a low drum off centre, the centre of the city by tradition if not geometry. The Lacus Curtius forms a darker patch, where stories say the ground once swallowed a man and closed again over his devotion. A child held by the hand could be led from marker to marker, and told these tales in a voice meant more to make sleep easy than to teach history. In the dark, the moral is always the same. The city survives because people put themselves in the right place at the right time and keep their agreements. Under it all, water moves. You hear it if you stand near the gratings and listen past your own breathing. The old channel that drinks the springs of the hills and escorts them under the city, stone-vaulted, brick-shouldered, takes a soft, constant music to the river. It carries the day's sweepings and the night's rinsings, and the smell that rises from it at this hour is not foul but earthy, like a cellar where someone once stored apples. On hot nights, a stray dog finds the cool near a grate and sleeps with its nose in the damp, unconcerned by politics or prayer. There is work at night here, but it is work that behaves itself. Temple attendants polish metal fittings with wool and oil, cutting tiny crescents of light onto door bosses and hinge faces. A pair of masons check a chipped step with fingers and a lamp, agree without many words what it needs, and make a neat repair while most of the city thinks of bread and sleep. A notice board, whitewashed and ready, waits for the first light when a scribe will smooth a fresh edict against it and fix it with nails that sit in his mouth while he works. Someone has left a garland at the altar of the deified Julius. At night the flowers look more honest, less concerned with how they appear, and a bee caught dozing in the petals will be untroubled until the sun remembers it. The sounds that remain are careful. Sandals of a patrol scuff evenly, and their talk, if any, is about practical things. A shutter that needs a better pin, a brazier too near a reed screen in a shop just outside the precinct. A boy who ran messages for them faithfully last week and should be remembered. Once, a funeral passed through here for a great man by daylight. At night the humble dead go by on other streets. Torches cupped by hands, flutes thin and insistent, heading toward the gates because the law and the old religion agree on this much. Rest for the living is inside the walls, rest for the dead is without. If a procession must cross this space after dark, it does so with the quiet that honours both. Above, the ridgelines of roofs cut the sky, and the constellations rest on them like things hung up to dry. A few professional star watchers like the roofs that look over the Forum. The horizon is low, and the sights familiar. A man might sit at the back corner of a portico column and wait for a particular star to rise just where the corner of the Curia meets the line of the hill, his own private observatory, calibrated against stone. He will pack his tablets before the watch changes and leave no trace except the flattened straw where he sat. In the house by the round shrine, the woman on duty stands and looks once more at the coals. A twig is pressed into ash. A small tongue of flame answers, then steadies, a creature satisfied. A senior guardian walks the peristyle once slowly, the soles of her sandals making a soft syllable on each flagstone, stops by the fountain where a trickle of water writes the same line over and over, and returns to a room whose order has been practised for so long that nothing is where it does not belong. The baskets of sacred implements are covered, the cupboards that hold older things, objects the city loves without needing to name, are closed. In a niche, a little figure of a household spirit keeps a private watch that needs no witnesses. If a dreamer in an upper room anywhere in the city asks without words whether the flame is alive, the answer is yes, and the sleeping can turn their faces to the cool side of the pillow. Toward the Capitoline end, the steps up into shadow are broad and patient. A guard from a neighbouring station likes to sit on the lowest one during the third watch. From here he can see most of the paving at a glance and hear footsteps enter or leave. He eats a piece of cheese, tucks the rind into a pouch rather than give the rats encouragement, and scratches a mark on a wax board. Fountain checked, lamplight near cloth stall extinguished. Stray dogs shooed gently away from the place where offerings sometimes fall. It is not heroism, it is maintenance of the world. He will stand when a colleague's lantern nods from across the square, and the two will exchange a low joke that will not deserve to be remembered but will be anyway. When the air swells with the first faint chill that belongs to the last watch, the forum breathes as if turning over in sleep. Somewhere behind the basilicas, a baker deciding to take the long route to the river passes along the edge of the stones, his cart a muffled conversation between wood and wheel. A lark thinks better of a note and saves it for later. The lamps in the porticos burn lower, their little tongues curled. A slave pinches one and leaves another to light a threshold for a master who will come past before dawn. The great things, the arches, the temples, the halls, remain themselves but simpler, denuded of crowds and speeches and all the promises that need an audience. What they keep for the night is shape, proportion, and the exact distance between one step and the next, enough to guide the feet of people who know the place and do not need to name it to love it. If you stand long enough, the dark begins to look like a kind of clarity. The roles each building plays, the way one god's house talks to another across empty space, the straight line a crier will take to be heard, the point where a procession will pause because the stone there echoes best. The forum is not asleep so much as it is thinking in a simpler language. Fire says its single word in the round shrine, stone answers by holding, water by moving, bronze by remembering. And when the eastern ridge finds its edge of silver, and the first sparrow risks the day with a small sound, the square will accept the return of heat and argument and bargaining without complaint, because the business of the night has been done, to keep the city's centre intact while it waits for those who will use it again. Climb with me to the ridge where the palace gardens breathe out the day. The Palatine at night is not loud the way the Subura is loud. It is a studied hush, a hush engineered out of stone, water, and distance. Laurel hedges cast crisp shadows on crushed gravel, clipped box forms dark green walls that make the paths feel secret even when they are straight. Pools lie like glass tablets engraved with the moon. If you stand still, you can hear what architects meant you to hear, the trickle of water in channels that were measured to a finger's depth, the light tap of sandals on marble that has been waxed and buffed until it answers footsteps with a whisper. Lamps hung from bronze hooks in the peristyles write ovals of honey-coloured light on colonnades. Beyond those ovals, the night is allowed to be night. Inside, a supper is advanced to the comfortable centre of itself. A triclinium glows, 3 couches facing a low, wide table, cushions piled lavishly, fabrics dyed in the kinds of purples and sea blues that have a cost built into them as surely as a weight of silver. Places are assigned by rank and favour. A slave with the easy invisibility that comes from long training leans to adjust a cushion so that a senator's elbow will be at the right height for reaching, no more, no less. The meal began with a sweetened wine cut with water in a mixing bowl, mulsum to open the throat, and with little starters meant to wake the mouth rather than feed the belly, eggs with a dusting of herbs, olives perfumed with fennel, neat triangles of cheese, oysters presented on a bed of damp seaweed that still smells faintly of shore. Fingers are dipped, wiped on mapai, linen napkins guests bring or are given, and rinsed again from small jugs that wink in the lamplight. Now the table is turned toward its heavier music. The prima mensa presents plates that are both food and argument. A boar glazed with honey and vinegar, and a scatter of pepper, fish arranged with sauce so glossy it looks lacquered, birds stuffed with spiced meat and pine nuts, greens slicked with oil. There is the kind of dish that appears because it was just praised in a poem. There is the kind that appears because a mother taught a cook once, and he has never forgotten her hand over his. Slaves move in lanes mapped by experience. One keeps the mixing bowl full and the dilution proper. Another watches for a guest whose cup never seems to be empty because he talks more than he drinks. Another patrols the floor with a little scraper to tidy a fallen crumb before anyone can notice. Music winds through the room. 2 flutes, soft as breath. A plucked lyre that does more listening than speaking. Someone tells a polished story, someone else interrupts with a better line, and is forgiven because wit is a kind of rank here too. Beyond the dining room, the palace is awake in compartments. In one, a secretary ab epistolis sits at a table with a sloped board, sorting correspondence by urgency. Reports from a legion posted where the nights are longer. A governor's letter heavy with self-congratulation but not empty of facts. A petition forwarded with 3 endorsements, and a margin note in a different hand that says simply, "Deserving." His lamp's wick has been trimmed so that the light's edge is clean and does not blur the ink. A second secretary, Arachnibus, counts out a sum twice, and sets aside a third count for the morning, in case the night's arithmetic was too confident. In another room, petitions a libellis have been tied in neat bundles with a slip that says which ones might be granted without trouble and which ones require face and voice. Chamberlains a cubiculo pass through the long corridors like caretakers of weather. They test the window panels of lapis specularis, thin shimmering stone that turns the draught into something a human can ignore. They see to the lamps, not letting any burn too low or too high. A steady flame is cheaper than a showy one, and a smoky flame is a silent insult to the room. They adjust curtains to temper echo, because conversation carries differently at night and people are tired and grow formal if the walls answer them. In rooms that hold small gods, the lararia of an imperial household, someone has already tapped ash from the incense bowl and set a new pinch in place for the last hour before bed. The convivium loosens its belt as the commissatio begins. The drinking is not the point. The measured togetherness is. An arbiter bibendi is chosen, sometimes by casting dice, sometimes by courtesy, to set the ratio of wine to water and the pace. Wreaths freshen heads, myrtle and rose. A few drops of thick perfume, a luxury with its own subtle politics, are passed, and wrists and beards take on a sweetness that will linger into the first watch. Dice may appear not for money but for dares. Compose a couplet. Praise that guest without using his name. Confess what you learned today that surprised you. A philosopher at the lower end of one couch, hired for the season or kept for years, tells a story about a king's dream, not to show off but because someone asked. A reader declaims a passage from a scroll newly acquired, history if the host is feeling responsible, satire if he is not. The night is a loom that weaves rank into delight so tightly you hardly see the seams. Farther along the hillside, in another wing, a soft-footed procession moves with bowls toward the palace kitchens, spaces as large as workshops, hot with banked fires and high with chimneys to draw the smoke. The cooks have mostly finished. They clean stone counters with sand and wipe them with vinegar, cover the jars that hold the permanent flavours of the house. Salted fish sauce, honey, pepper, mustard. A boy is showing another how to turn a spit with one hand and shape a coarse loaf with the other, because the second watch will demand bread for servants who have worked since dusk. They exchange mock complaints about the men at table, who never see the burns that make other people's food possible. In a near room, a steward inventories plate and bolts the pantry, where the costliest things sleep, pepper sealed in waxed jars, saffron bright as a warning, a coil of purple-dyed cloth that will be cut for a certain official when a certain letter arrives. He chalks a note at the edge of a shelf. Charcoal. 2 more sacks. Not all corridors are public corridors. Some are the kind you do not notice until you do, and then you cannot stop seeing them. The crypto porticos that run cool and shaded along the belly of the hill, floors sprinkled with light that filters through slit windows. In the heat of summer they are the spine of the complex. At night they are the nerves. Messengers use them to carry copies of letters from one secretary to another without crossing courtyards and making themselves a subject for curious eyes. A physician moves along one with a small case of instruments and remedies, honey, vinegar, wool, pincers, a probe, because the body has its own will, and the body of a great household sometimes needs small, quick kindnesses. The physician checks on a child with a bellyache and leaves behind advice. Boil the water a little longer in this weather. Do not skimp the fennel. Outside, the Palatine keeps earlier stories in view. In a fenced space near a sacred fig, the tiny hut that pretends to be Romulus's house has been tidied for the day, ritually disordered to keep it looking old, ritually repaired to keep it from becoming a ruin. The door is barred at night, the thatch combed, the ground swept in a way meant to look like no one came. A custodian passes by once and pauses because he's allowed to be sentimental on this path. The Lupercal's cave below the hill yawns black. A priest who has walked farther than he meant to stops to make sure a shutter lies where it ought to, then continues toward a bed that will give him fewer hours than he hoped for. Security, too, is a practice rather than a performance, a detachment of guards chosen for steady temper rather than mere height, stations itself at key doors. They know when to show a spear's butt and when to show a palm. Their commander is the sort who can speak with a noble and a kitchen scullion and remember each name. He walks a route that has been walked by other men in other seasons and leaves small signs, a thread tucked under a hinge, a pebble laid on a window ledge, to tell if a door has been opened since he passed. He notes which lamps are a fraction too low. A tired servant will be gently scolded in the morning, not to shame but to teach a standard. Somewhere a sealed box sits on a table. The wax carries the impression of a signet that matters. No one touches it, because in palaces discipline is as much about what you do not do as what you do. Midway through the night the party thins. The guests who must be seen to stay late a little longer. The guest who must be seen to leave sober makes sure he is seen to leave sober. A side door opens to the private path. Few steps, a turn, another few, and a litter waits with its curtains drawn, bearers refreshed and silent. A nomenclator who spent the day whispering names into a master's ear so he would never forget a face, now whispers his list of thanks to the steward so the proper trays, leftover fruit, a wrapped sweet, a small loaf scented with anise, are sent to the right people at the door. Gifts are not cheap bribery here. They are the threads that keep a city's cloth from unravelling under its own weight. In a dim gallery lined with statues, the stone bodies take on the animation of shadow. A Caesar's face is less sure of itself in the lamp's slant than it is at noon. A philosopher's beard looks like a piece of carved weather. The pedestals hold inscriptions that are easier to read when the air is cool. A young scribe, walking too fast because he has misjudged how long the path is, slows instinctively. He pauses before the figure of a woman who once ruled a household with the same serious regard she now bends upon the space in front of her. Marble wrists bent as if arranging a garland that is now nothing but idea. He bows his head a fraction, not out of fear of eyes that cannot see, but because the composition of stone and dark makes reverence the intelligent reaction. Dawn will eventually unlace the night from these rooms, but before that final loosening the Palatine performs a small inventory of itself. A gardener waters the pots that hold rosemary and myrtle so their fragrance rises when the first warm air moves. 2 boys with baskets collect the lamp wicks to be trimmed and twisted new. A woman who has sung softly to herself, all through her service tonight, finally hums a line out loud, because no one is near and because she can. The last guest's litter disappears down the hill. The last cup is polished and set in its place. A letter lies waiting with the seal of a province, where a river is already bright with morning. The hill holds everything: power, sleep, appetite, memory, without seeming to try. Across the valley, the amphitheatre sits like a sleeping instrument whose strings need tightening before the day can play them. The outer ring is a lace of stone, arch within arch, each one a mouth that can swallow not only crowds but a great deal of air. At night the air pours through and out again, making the place cooler, drying the sand and the timber underneath. The arches at ground level wear chains and gates. Torchlight paints their curves with oranges and browns. On the paving that fans out from the entrances, the night crews are already at work, and their gear looks modest until you see what the building requires it to do. The velarium, the mighty awning that can shade thousands, does not exist until sailors make it exist. They arrive after dusk from quarters kept for them near the amphitheatre, men from the fleets who know rope like other people know family. They coil lines that would make a householder proud to own a single length of them. They test pulleys the size of shields. They massage tallow into a block that will need to slide cleanly when the sun bites. Along the attic of the building, stout masts tilt outward like a crown of spars. From these, a webbing of rigging runs down to anchoring points, and into the hollow where spectators will sit tomorrow. Tonight, with no strain on the cloth, the sailors practice the sequence. The calls, the hand signs, the tug all at once that makes canvas behave like a tame piece of weather. They are not here to unfurl it now. They are here because a line that frayed unseen in moonlight might fail under noon, and failure here is not theatrical. Under the arena floor, the hypogeum is a city of its own. Passages run like tunnels in a hill, trapdoors dot the roof. Capstans stand like tree stumps with their tops shaved flat. Men, 4 to a bar, sometimes 8, lean their weight and walk-push until the axle turns and lifts a platform. In the night, the carpenters check the teeth of cogs with tallow and charcoal. They listen for the bad sound, a chip, a crack, a catch. Leather straps creak as they are stretched and greased. Pegs are swapped. Wedges are tapped in so the platform will stop exactly flush with the sand and not a finger above or below. The men who know these machines know them like bodies. How much spring a beam should have, which rope hums falsely when it sags, the way a good line sings when pulled. A boy runs a test with sacks of sand on one lift. Up, hold, down, reset. He notes with a nail on a post how far the capstan walks before the platform sits true. Animals breathe the dark differently from men. In pens at the edge of the hypogeum, in holding cells along a service passage, and in yards nearby set aside for the purpose, you can hear them making sense of their confinement. A cat's padded turn, the shift of a hoof, the withers shiver that a nervous creature uses to tell its skin that the world is being watched. Handlers move among them with the kind of confidence that is half knowledge and half illusion. The men of the Ludus Matutinus, the school for those who face beasts in the morning, come and go, measuring a cat for a collar, tugging a gate to be sure the latch has its life in it. Water is set, feed checked, a damp cloth hung where the night air will soften it so the animal's eyes can be wiped before it rises into light. In the pens that hold the gentler animals, there is a hay quiet. In those that hold the predators, there is another quiet, the kind made of listening. Torches are kept lower here. A man who likes his fingers keeps them. On the arena itself, the sand is combed. Rakes with long teeth draw lines. Men walking backward check for hollows where blood and water pooled, and add dry sand with baskets swung overhand. The shape of the day is written here every night and erased every night. Markers are set for where a gate will open, or a tableau will rise. A steward counts the seats on a schedule of the cunei, the wedge-shaped sections of the cavea, and nods to himself. The magistrate who bought the left block will be pleased that his section has a fresh coat of whitewash. The Guild of Carpenters will find their benches swept, and a new peg hammered where a board had wagged. A painter, touching up a number on a stair riser, mutters that a city of letters has taught even its stairs to speak. Across the street, the Ludus Magnus glows through its windows. Within, the rectangular training yard, surrounded by porticos and little cells where men sleep, holds its own night shift. Gladiators, the hordeari, some call them for the barley that props their strength, stretch and run forms under a trainer's eye. Wooden swords crack against wooden shields with a rhythm that would be harsh if it were not so measured. Diet is weighed even now. Barley mash, beans, dried figs, a ladle of broth. A medicus examines a bruised shoulder and rubs in oil before binding it. He mixes a drink with sour wine and a little plant ash, a tonic some claim feeds the bones, and hands it to a man whose teeth show a gap earned in training, not performance. Armourers patch leather, rivet mail, stitch the bindings inside a helmet so it will not scrape. A suitor taps nails into sandal soles, reinforces the straps that keep a greave obedient. On a wall, a schedule chalked by a lanista lists tomorrow's pairs with a brevity that hides months of calculation about skill, style, temper, and appetite. Vendors study the day the way farmers study weather. They set aside jugs of cheap wine and stacks of beakers. They measure garlands against the width of a man's head and adjust a knot. A woman who sells nuts roasts them now and lets them cool under a cloth so that when the crowd arrives, the smell can be woken with one turn of the heap. Another readies a jar of cheap perfume. Spectators will buy a drop for a wrist and think themselves part of the same civilization that perfumes emperors. At a little table outside a gate, a clerk counts a stack of tesserae, tiny tokens that say who belongs where and when, and bags them by entrance. He writes a neat line on a wax tablet, spare cords for the queue ropes. The amphitheatre's guardians move in patterns that look casual only because they are old. They check that the vomitoria, the entries that swallow crowds and spit them into their seats, are clear of debris, and that their hinges speak the right language when nudged. They feel the handrails for roughness and mark a splintering spot with a dab of chalk so a carpenter can smooth it at first light. They look up at the ring corridor beneath the topmost seats, where the wind is always a little more ambitious, and make sure a gate to the outer ledge is bolted. Curiosity and height are a marriage that demands supervision. They step into the shadowed alcove where a statue of a river god leans, his urn tipped forever. Someone has left a small bread roll there. One of the watch tucks it to the side where creatures will find it without turning the place into a picnic. Outside, the Meta Sudan's ghost, once a great cone of a fountain that sweated water down its sides, reminds the paving that this place is also about thirst. Carriers trundle amphorae to fill cisterns hidden under stairs. Water is an invisible part of the show, 100 tiny rinsings required to make one public spectacle look effortless. A man chalks an X on a door that sticks. Another hangs a board that says the east gate will open earlier if wind rises from that quarter. The arch that remembers a stern victory stands to one side like a silent usher. A stray dog, deciding that everything here is too organised to tolerate him, drifts back toward the forum where old men share crumbs and opinions. A corridor, some call it the Passage of Champions, links the amphitheatre to the training school so that men can move unseen from bed to arena. Tonight, a small group passes through it to check the lamps, scrape away a smear of soot, and make sure a door's bolt is used. One of them, superstitious in a way he would never admit, touches the wall where someone long ago scratched a circle and a star, and then rubs his palm on his thigh as if to erase the gesture. The superstition doesn't matter. The corridor matters. It matters that feet know how many steps there are, that the last stair is a slightly wider one, that someone thought to put a basin there, because thirst comes at bad times and water at the right height is kindness. All this attention produces something the crowd will not see and would not pay for if you could list it: reliability. A rope that does not fail, a gate that swings when pushed, a trap that opens not too soon and not too late, a path cleared of the nail that would put a splinter in a child's day. The amphitheatre is a great machine that converts many people's caution into many other people's excitement. It pays for itself with noise at noon. It prepares itself with quiet at night. As the last watch approaches, the amphitheatre breathes deeper. The wind rises a little from the east and slips under the arcades. Banners stored in chests remember their colours and wait for sunlight to prove them again. A scribble of graffiti, wishes, boasts, a crude drawing of a helmet, glows faintly where a lamp finds it. The sailors coil their last rope and stack it the way their fathers stacked rope. The carpenters walk the circuits they always walk, after they say they are done, because the thing you see after you say you are done is the thing that would have embarrassed you. A handler tightens one last latch and speaks a word to an animal that does not care about words but does care that the same man has come at the same time and done the same thing in the same way. Somewhere beyond the arches, a cock announces that daylight has sent a letter ahead. The first spectators will not come for hours, but the building knows they are real already. A gatekeeper stretches his back and thinks about the price of lettuce. A gladiator turns on his pallet and dreams a dream that refuses to make sense. The crews, one by one, lay down their tools where the morning shift expects to find them, because trust between strangers is made of small predictions that come true. The sand is smooth, the machines are coiled, the ropes are patient, the hill opposite has finished its own night of letters, sleep and ceremony. The city will wake to its two great theatres of power, one for command, one for spectacle, and neither will creak when the day puts weight on it. When the last bathers step over the threshold and the porter draws the doors together, the great rooms do not fall silent, they change key. The hot breath that made the caldarium shimmer by day continues to feed the stone from below, a subterranean weather that must be managed with the same care a captain gives a ship. Down a sloping corridor behind a door marked more by habit than by sign, the Prefernium opens like a red mouth. Here the nightmen, broad-shouldered, eyes narrowed against flying cinders, tend the fires that make the whole complex work. They are stokers and keepers of balance both. If the flames roar too high, the plaster in the hot room crazes and cracks. Too low, and the air above floors goes from soothing to sulky. The Hippocaust is a city beneath the city, a forest of little square pillars, peely, built of stacked tiles, supporting the pavements of the hot and warm rooms a hand's breadth above the ground. Through that shallow space the furnace sends its heat, which slips under mosaic dolphins and marble benches, rises into the hollow clay tube set in walls, tubally, and escapes as a ghost of warmth through hidden vents. The stokers know the roots of this invisible river. They have learned that a bundle of olive wood burns slower than pine, that vine cuttings flame fast and bright, but leave ash that drifts like treacherous snow into corners where it can choke a flue. They have a vocabulary for what the fire is doing, a good draw, a lazy corner, a tile that ticks like a pot about to boil. Wood arrives after dark because wheeled traffic inside the city belongs to the night. Carts back into service courtyards where the stones bear the polish of years of turning axles. Porters unload billets into orderly stacks under a roof where the damp cannot eat the heat the logs still hold. A tallyman, his stylus shining with use, counts and marks. Ash wood for a steady base, pine for quick lifts, a few precious lengths of oak to push the hottest hours in winter. The stokers keep a strict economy of cinders, raking and banking embers so that the first stingy flames of the next feed will catch without smoke. Soot creeps up everything. A boy assigned to the furnace rooms wipes lintels and lamp hooks with vinegar rags, black cloths turning blacker until they become the kind of rags one only uses to wipe the floor. Above, the rooms breathe. Though the doors are closed to the public, attendants move, small figures in big spaces. In the apoditerium, the changing hall, hooks along the walls hold the day's forgotten sandals and the odd towel someone will come begging for at first light. Capsari, the attendants whose job is to watch clothing, sort the last of the bundles, poor men's tunics, a senator's cloak left with a scribbled promise of return, into neat heaps against a wall. They say they never sleep. Those who bathe often say the capsari never quite tell the truth. At a table by the door, a clerk counts token discs that were issued for entry and for extras, a massage, a scraping, scented oil, and drops them into jars one by one, the soft clink repeating until the jar is full. In the caldarium, steam softens the air into a mercy. The bronze cauldron that perches just beyond the furnace mouth, water pan above fire, stone curb around its lip, sweats gently. Attendants skim the film from the surface with a ladle and feed fresh water from the cistern that the aqueducts keep blessedly full. In the largest establishments the heating is doubled, one system for air, one for water, but even in small neighbourhood baths ingenuity is a currency. A man taps the limestone that scaling is glued to a pipe and judges whether the morning's hammering will be light or heavy. Left untended, scale narrows a pipe until a basin becomes a sulk. In wall alcoves the lamps burn steady, wicks are trimmed, oil-topped, soot wiped in around. A strigil, a curved scraper, gleams on a shelf. The day's oil sweat, gloyos, the mix of fine olive oil and the dust and skin of 1,000 bodies, has been wiped into jars some apothecary will buy, convinced of its power to heal, to soften, to do something useful because it came from people and effort. The temperature ladder, frigidarium, tepidarium, caldarium, cold, warm, hot, is as much psychology as engineering. Even empty, the rooms hold their characters. The frigid bath lies still and metallic in lamplight. A night attendant skims floating petals left from a festive citizen's whim with a net on a willow wand. He listens for the echo that says the water level has been kept honest. The tepid room is where stone feels like skin. No shock, no demand, just rest. Men with soft brushes go from bench to bench, working oil and dust into the bristles, rinsing with buckets, the splash adding a gentle percussion to the breathing of the place. In the hot room, a worker slides a palm along the curved apse and nods, satisfied. The wall is warm evenly, not hot in one patch and indifferent in another, a sign the flues were cleared properly in the afternoon. Cleaning is a craft here. Mosaic floors, with their tesserae set in pinkish waterproof mortar, do not like to be bullied. Sand is rubbed, swept, and rinsed. The raised floors are checked for the drum note that says a pillar has settled wrong. If it has, 2 men lift a tile square with the practised care a midwife gives a jointed limb, prop the weak corner, and replace the pavement so that no morning foot will feel a wobble. In the latrines, the cleanest place in Rome and the dirtiest by reputation, a boy empties basins and refills them. Water runs constantly along the gutter at the foot of the seats, and a lantern set high keeps the tile from feeling like a cave. Someone has hung sprigs of myrtle along a beam, not because they do anything the water does not do, but because men like to know that someone has thought of what they will smell. The bath has its own economy. Oil amphorae, their clay shoulders stamped with maker's marks from Baetica and Africa, lie tilted in cradles so the last of their treasure will slip obediently toward the plug. Cheap oil for the masses, finer oil for those who tip. A chest of strigils and little alabaster bottles, unguentaria, wait to be requisitioned by unctores, the men who will rub oil into shoulders until the knots sigh and let go. Towels hang over rails to dry. A woman with red hands rings another with a twist that has become a signature. In a side room, an alipta, a masseur, boils linen in a copper pot and rinses it in clean water steeped with bay leaves. He swears the scent makes men breathe deeper and stop holding their own shoulders like prisoners. Night is when the faults admit themselves. A hairline crack in a tub's marble lip that no one noticed in steam reveals itself in dry lamplight. A draught under a door shows a mason where to lay a string of oakum tomorrow. A faint stain on a wall, rising damp, marks the need for a day of drying fires and open windows when the weather permits. The chief attendant makes a circuit with a wax tablet and a stub of stylus, marking problems not with blame but with destinations, to the mason, to the plumber, to the man who can sweet-talk the aqueduct overseer if the pressure in the feeder pipe sulks again. In Great Therme, the night staff are a small army. Porters shoulder baskets of charcoal up a stair that seems longer in the dark. A carpenter repairs a locker door a careless guest kicked. The doorman of the women's side, a day shift job, has left a note about a weeping hinge. Women bathe in their own hours. By night that wing mirrors the other. The same sweeps, the same skimmings, the same careful care of heat that respects skin more than spectacle. In small neighbourhood balnea, the staff is a handful. One stoker who is also a cleaner, one boy, one manager with a calculating mind, and a gift for remembering exactly which regular prefers the warm basin and which insists on plunging cold first as the gods intended. Fuel feeds conversation. The nightmen talk about wood the way bakers talk about flour. This lot smokes too much. That bundle is perfect. The new supplier says he seasoned it, but the knots tell a different story. They talk about a man who fainted in the hot room and swore it was the gods when everyone knew it was wine. About a thief caught with his hand in the clothing pile, and a Capsarius who was faster than he looks. About the senator who bought oil for the whole room on the first day of Saturnalia, and made the old unctor cry with the unexpectedness of it. Before dawn, the final rituals. Ash pulled from the mouth of the furnace into a bin to be carried by cart to gardens beyond the walls. The first buckets thrown down the drains to wake the channels. A sample drawn from the hot basin to judge clarity and temperature. The furnace is fed not for night now, but for morning. Logs place the way a good reader lays out a speech, so the fire will rise in steps and meet the first bathers with the right balance of heat and light. At the door, the porter sets his stool and arranges the small tray that holds token discs. The stylus, a spare wick, a flat stone to cap a pot against nosy mice. He opens the door at the moment the first light finds the highest edge of the wall and watches the street discover once again how civilized it feels to begin the day with water and warmth. Down the hill and along the curve of the river, the other half of the city's maintenance of life works the dark like a loom. The Tiber slides past the quays under a skin of lamplight and moonsheen, unbothered by law, indifferent to fatigue, carrying the weight that keeps the city fed. Flat-bottomed barges nose in against bollards. Ropes slap over posts worn into elegant shapes by years of pulling. The men who ride the barges can tie a bowline in sleep. The men who walk the towpaths can tell you by the feel through the rope what the river is thinking. Up from Ostia and Portus the loads come. Grain from Africa and Egypt, oil from Baetica, wine from everywhere a vine will try. Transferred from sea hull to river hull, from river to shore, from shore to store, in a sequence so practiced that it is mistaken for inevitability. The grain has its own cast of characters. Naviculari, ship owners, stand with arms folded and eyes that count faster than a stylus. Mensors, the measurers, hold their rods and their dignity. The modius basket dips and rises, a dry tide into sacks whose stitched mouths have been loosened for the work. Saccharee, backmen with the calves of mountain goats, shoulder loads and pad along planks with the economy of movement you find in any trade that punishes wasted effort. Their hands are thick with rope memory. A scriba of the Annona, the grain office, watches from a high stool with a wax tablet in his lap. He calls out names that make the night a ledger. Horea Galbae, 2 sections. Horea Loliana, 1. Statio Annonai, urgent. The warehouses stand like patient animals facing the river. Horea are more than sheds, they are devices. Their floors are raised on squat pillars, again a forest of brick to keep damp and rat both at bay. Their walls, thick with brick and mortar, hold cool air the way a good amphora holds wine. Doors are barred not just with wood but with arithmetic. Seals of clay stamped with the mark of the office. Cords that make a web a curious boy will not successfully navigate. Cats make their rounds along the rafters with the authority of salaried staff. Dogs patrol the yard and pretend none of them care for cats. Lamps hang from hooks in aisles, the light falling in messy ladders onto stacks of sacks and rows of dolia. Enormous clay jars half sunk in the floor, that turn liquid into something a building can think with. A test for dryness is simple. A man scoops a double handful of wheat and lets it fall. If it whispers, it is good. If it sighs, there is water where there should not be, and a steaming day must be arranged. Another test. A handful crushed hard and held to the nose. Grain breathes its worries. Those who listen correctly keep rot a stranger. Now and then sulphur is burned in a closed room and the smoke allowed to creep into corners where insects hold their family councils. Rosemary smoulders in a brazier because the night shift likes rosemary. All this feeds Rome's mouths, and Rome's mouths expect bread at dawn. So somewhere not far from a quay, somewhere just beyond the cattle market or tucked into a lane that remembers dolphins painted on a wall from when fishmongers ruled the smell of it, Epistrenum, the bakery, opens its night like a book and reads from the familiar page. Donkeys walk in circles, blindfolded to still the part of the mind that dislikes monotony, turning great millstones upright on a base that drinks grit and yields flour. The miller tests the grind between finger and thumb, judges whether to widen or close the adjustable gap, a whisper. Flour falls into chests lined against damp. Boys with hair dusted white shovel it into tubs where water and sourdough starter, a secret that is not a secret, a culture that an ancestor coaxed into cooperation years ago, turn powder into something alive. Kneading is a music of heels and fingers. Men and women lean into the mass and fold it and lean again. The dough slowly loses its stubbornness. Salt goes in, oil sometimes for richer loaves, honey, rarely, for a festival. The baker's palms feel what the eye cannot see. The moment gluten makes a net strong enough to catch and hold the bubbles that will become tenderness. The workbenches where a patina of flour work deep into wood grain. The peels, broad long-handled paddles, lean ready by the oven mouth. The oven itself, a domed fornax, was fired earlier. A man who knows heat like a friend's moods tells by the colour of the bricks under the soot whether the belly is ready. If the roof glows a peach colour when a lamp is thrust inside, it is time. Loaves take on identities as they are shaped. Round country breads marked with a cross-cut for even rising. Long loaves for slicing into soldiers' rations. Small stamped rolls with the baker's seal. Insurance against those who will later swear they were shorted. Some kinds are sprinkled with sesame, some with poppy seed, some left plain for the poorest. The peel slides in, jerks, leaves its cargo upon the brick, and slides back. The oven's mouth is stopped with a square door smeared with clay to seal gaps. A thin line of smoke edges out and is smoothed with the flat of a hand. Outside, a boy starts to arrange baskets for the first deliveries. The night's ban on heavy carts divides the city's labour like a river divides fields. While most sleep, the wheels roll, wood to baths, grain to mills, flour to bakeries, bread toward markets and doorsteps, amphorae of oil to the places that trade light and food both. The vigils mind the bottlenecks and wave one cart through, hold another, reroute a third. In the river quarter, coopers work late, binding iron hoops around bellies of new barrels, tapping them like drums to hear if the tightness is true. Fullers, their vats having been beaten all day, empty and refill in the cool, fetch jars from corners where passers-by contributed to the city's invisible economy, rinse alleys down. Smiths choose night for careful filing. Noise makes enemies in daylight. The grain dole, when it comes, will be a day business, but night readies it. Tesserae, tokens that prove a man's right to the state's grain, are sorted in a back room by lamplight. A clerk checks names against a list. A second clerk checks the first clerk with the help of a boy whose job is to read out loud, and whose reading is improving because lists are relentless teachers. In another office, a man sleeps on a bench with his head in the crook of his elbow, his hand still near the seal of the office. He will rise at first light and stamp cords with the sign that says, "This sack is not merely grain, but a promise kept." Toward the second and third watches, the river thickens with sound. A barge poles off. The poleman grunts softly. The hull sighs against its neighbour. The wake slaps the stone in polite applause. A note of warning travels along the quay. Mule team crossing give way, and the beasts, patient in the way that slaves aspire to be and sometimes are, lean into harness on the towpath, hauling a barge upstream against the current so slow a poet would call it motionless. Lanterns bob. A swear word climbs a rope and evaporates. A laugh from a brazier by a warehouse door joins the cloud. When the bakers open their ovens to turn the loaves and pull the first ones out, the air rights roams morning before the sun does. Warm bread and char, yeast and smoke, a thread of olive oil, a rumour of sesame. The men who will carry baskets to market wrap cloth around their forearms and practice, quickly, the patter they will use in the first hour. Fresh, hot, honest weight. At a corner near a shrine to Ceres, someone who climbed early to thank the goddess of grain tips a bit of flour onto the altar stone and smooths it with 2 fingers into a crescent, because his mother taught him that shape and habit matters. By then the keys have finished the night's heavy trilogy, unload, measure, move, and replaced it with a quieter epilogue. A last barge arrives late and is allowed to tie up on the promise that its sacks will not be cracked until noon. The cats accept their pay in offal left in a clean spot. The dogs accept their pay in names spoken kindly. A clerk sand sprinkles an inked page so the letters will not smear, shakes it off, and blows once and twice for luck he would deny believing in. Lamps are snuffed, one by one, along the long aisles of the Horea, where coolness and order live like household gods no one bothers to carve, and as the first carts loaded with bread slip into the lanes where people are waking, the river pulls a new skin onto its back, green-grey now instead of the silver it wore all night, and resumes its daylight conversation with the city. But the work that let this happen, the moving of grain and fire, the measured heat under stone, the careful counting and the careful carrying, belongs to the dark hours, to people whose names do not make inscriptions but whose rhythms become everyone else's breakfast. Night gathers the city into smaller circles, and within those circles devotion keeps its own quiet pace. In a modest room, high in an insula, a family straightens the shelf that is more temple than furniture. It is painted the colour of new clay, and edged with a red line that frames the little world upon it. 2 small figures, the Lares of the household, step forward in a dancer's pose, tunics swirling. Between them a slender pillar or a miniature altar marks the Penots, the guardians of stores and hearth. On the back wall, a painted serpent undulates toward a low basket, a symbol of luck, or the spirit of the place itself, or both. The father pinches incense between his fingers. The mother twists a thread of wool and lays it across the base. A child, solemn as a magistrate, sprinkles a pinch of salted flour. The flame is brief, the smoke sweet, the gratitude specific. Bread, safe feet on the stair, 1 full jar of oil, the cough that left the baby. The family steps back into the room that is suddenly larger for having acknowledged what supports it. In a townhouse nearer the Forum, the same rite wears finer clothes. The Lorarium is not a shelf but a niche carved into polished wall, its little pediment sheltering silver figures bright enough to catch every tremor of lamplight. On a festival day, a wreath hangs there. On an ordinary night, a few bay leaves and a small statue of the genius, the household's tutelary spirit, receive a libation spooned with a controlled hand so that no drop stains the marble. The steward watches the level of the amphora and makes a small mark on a wax tablet, not out of suspicion, but because even piety likes accountability in a busy house. A slave boy holds the lamp steady, his eyelids low against the heat, and learns the sequence: lift, pour, bow, cover, breathe. Later, when the house sleeps and his corner is his own, he repeats a shortened version with a crumb, a whisper, and the scrap of a laurel leaf he tucked away. At street corners, the city's shared guardians keep vigil. Shrines of the Lares Compitales rise from the paving at intersections, little masonry houses with roof tiles like children's toys. Their fronts often carry crude but expressive paintings, snakes coiling, boys bringing garlands, neighbourhood gods with round, watchful eyes. A lamp set within throws a square of warm light onto the dust. Two men from the Vicus Association, bakers by day, officials by night, adjust the wick, settle a fresh sprig, and nod to the bench where offerings of yesterday have been pushed aside for today's. A few figs, a copper coin, a crust. On feast days this corner will riot with ribbons and cakes. Tonight it asks only for continuity, which the men provide by habit. Not all devotions are domestic or civic, some belong to the hours when the city is mostly asleep. In the middle watch of a night in May, a household arises with a look that says duty more than fear, and quietly removes his signet ring because death does not like the clang of rank. Barefoot he walks the perimeter of his home, spitting black beans from his mouth into the darkness behind him one by one, counting to 9 because 9 persuades. These I send to the shades of my ancestors, he murmurs. Only when he has made the circuit, only when the beans lie like a dotted path for the unhappy dead, does he raise his hands and say, 9 times again, without looking back, "Spirits of my fathers, depart." It is the Lemuria, a private peace treaty signed at midnight in a city that prefers treaties to lawsuits where ghosts are concerned. When he is done, he relaxes into his bed with the relief of a task completed, not theatrically but properly. Elsewhere, the sky itself dictates worship. On a hilltop terrace behind a temple, where the horizon is a thin script cut in silver, a small circle gathers before dawn. They are devotees of a goddess whose rites favour early light and clear water, Isis, whose bark will be paraded when the river swells and the sea road opens. The priest shakes a sistrum once, a low shimmer like a wake behind a boat, and they face east. The first star to lose its nerve is the morning star, which the Romans call Lucifer when it leads the sun. Gentle torch-bearer, never the villain in this language. Hands rise as if to hold the line where dark and day meet. A priest pours a libation. Another addresses the goddess with words that have been spoken over and over until they feel like remembering rather than speaking. When sunrise finally underlines their prayers with light, they disperse as if the city had quietly wound them into its waking machinery. On the Aventine, in a precinct that values the moon, Diana's Grove is a darker shape against the sky. Her priest's duties tonight are practical, checking that the hinges answer the gentlest push, that last month's wax droppings at the base of a cypress have been scraped, that stray offerings, bread left in foolish kindness for animals, have been removed so the place does not become a kitchen. They pause, because everyone pauses here, at the long view across the river, roofs, then darkness, then a paler stripe that suggests dawn will happen without legislation. Dogs bark twice in the valley and then reconsider. The temple's little birds sleep in the entablature, tucked in the carved acanthus as if in a ruched curtain. The Capitolin's great god requires fewer night hands but bears more night stories. Somewhere a guard's mind is telling again the tale old men told him. The sacred geese who once cried out at danger and woke the hill when men failed to. He pretends he does not believe. He also throws a handful of grain near a well-worn corner, because disbelief is a luxury and custom is cheap. The bronze doors of Jupiter's temple are shut with that satisfying final sound that only good metal and good carpentry produce together. Their fittings feel cool. A pigeon, opinionated as always, struts along the step and then settles into the carved folds of a marble toga for a few more minutes of warmth before the stone relinquishes it. In the quiet of a domus courtyard, the night has the feel of a watched thing. The impluvium holds a rectangle of stars, the atrium columns at the corners framing Orion, his belt exactly aligned with the beam that creaks when the wind comes from the river. An augur might call the heavens a book written for those who know how to read it, but most readers here are practical. A woman with sore wrists counts the breaths between the faintest of breezes to time a stretch she has been taught. An old man tells his grandson not to decide important matters under a full moon, because it makes the world feel simpler than it is. In the peristyle, vines and roses hold the last cool of the bricks and return it to anyone who lingers along the path. The family shrine's lamp burns down with a controlled grace that comes from a competent wick. When it gutters, a slave pinches it and leaves a finger smudge that he will wipe in the morning. Up in a loft above a workshop, a man who makes small bronze statues has a different ritual. He keeps a votive assortment on a board: broken fingers of marble hands, a foot that once marched across a public frieze, a child's toy horse caught from ruin in a heap of rubble, and a thumb-sized Mercury with his caduceus. He arranges them each night with the same order: larger pieces at the back, smaller to the front, then places his tools in parallel lines, a little army at rest. He touches each tool in turn and names it softly, an inventory his father taught him: hammer, chasing tool, burin, drill, file. Then he lies down beside the stove that will be lit at dawn and looks through the roof's small smoke hole at a trapezoid of sky where the Pleiades sit like a button. He knows that when those stars rise before sunrise in spring, certain markets will crowd. When they sink into evening in autumn, certain customers will bring in household gods to be polished for winter. His temple is work. His god tonight is the predictability of stars. The astrologer 2 buildings over conducts business more delicately. Periodic edicts frown on his trade, and yet when a woman comes in the last watch, wrapped to the eyes and carrying a question like a weight, he lights a single lamp, shades it, and calculates as if doing sums for a baker. He marks the hour, the sign rising over the eastern rooftops, the moon's phase, a coin that grows and shrinks in public view and still keeps secrets. He spreads sand thinly and draws the houses on it with a stylus. He places little pebbles for the planets. His voice is soft. His cautions are louder than his promises. He's not a priest. He's a map seller, and the map's roads have names like Patience and Prudence. When the woman leaves, he blows out the lamp and sits in the dark for a little while to let his eyes love the stars unfiltered. Just beyond the walls, at a gate that faces the road to the north, 2 watchmen trade a countersign that would make a soldier smile for its simplicity. One looks out at fields tracked with moon. The other sits on a bench and oils a hinge that complained earlier. The great roads are quieter at night, but not empty. A small caravan of pack animals passes with bells muffled. Their leader raises a hand, the guard lifts a lantern just enough to see faces, the exchange of trust too practiced to need drama. In the distance, a burial ground lies with its little city of tombs, sippy like stumps, altars like small houses, portraits on stone that have looked across this stretch of road for decades, and will go on looking when today's eyebrows are odd to future eyes. A boy on a dare once came here at midnight and learned that the fear you bring is the fear you meet. He told no one, which did him good. In country houses the nightly rites are humbler but not poorer. A farmer comes home late from checking a ditch that wandered out of line. He sits on his threshold, wipes his knife, and puts it away because blades and bedsate do not share rooms. He rises and goes to the household shrine, a little box with 2 doors, and opens it. Inside, a terracotta la smiles with the mysterious good humour of small statues. The farmer sets a walnut there and a crumble of cheese. He murmurs a line his mother used: "For what we ate, for what we will eat, for breath." He closes the doors and knocks twice on the wood, not as command but as announcement, so that any listening spirit will know the offering has been made, and there will be no embarrassment in taking it. Sailors, even when moored, offer to the sky by reflex. In Ostia, a man on a deck that tilts almost imperceptibly with the river's deep heartbeat raises a cup to the constellation he trusts most, Ursa Major, the wagon that points, and drinks once for the past, once for the next departure, once for whoever waits inland for the cargo to become bread. He tucks the cup under a coil of rope and pulls his cloak tighter. A cat that lives by choosing the ship of the softest crew jumps up, circles twice, and settles into a shape that says the weather will be uneventful until dawn. Inside the city again, a small temple few people bother to name goes through the invisible work that keeps it available to those who do. A caretaker sweeps the vestibule, his broom making that hollow whisper wood makes on stone. He checks that the basin of holy water is clean. He wipes the lip with a cloth dipped in fresh. He rehearses the unlocking of the door, a gesture he performs every morning and will perform every morning until hands younger than his take it up. He lights 2 lamps and then snuffs one, because the second lamp will wake later, and he is thrifty. As he leaves, he touches the door frame with the back of his fingers, a habit he cannot explain except by saying that it feels like counting the temple without disturbing it. The city's festivals, the great public ones with their sacrifice and their speeches and their crowds, belong to day. But night prepares them, stitches their hems. In a storeroom behind a basilica, bundles of laurel are stacked, ready to be twined into garlands. On a bench lies a brass horn with the dents a century has politely ignored. A boy rubs it with chalk and feels the metal become smoother under his small circles. A woman checks her inventory of ribbons by colour and length. She adds a mark at the bottom of the wooden tablet for the order that came too late and will need to be conjured early. A man in charge of nothing but the chalk that marks off the area for processions sits on his stool and looks at a string. He has found over the years that thinking about a straight line in the dark helps draw one in the morning. Above, the Milky Way, the Via Lactea, arches like a pale road. Romans who farm call it the path where kernels of wheat fell from a god's sack. Children call it the spilt milk of Juno. Sailors, roadsmen that they are, call it what it looks like. The constellations hold their places. Mars bright, Saturn patient, Jupiter glad to be recognized. To the east, a paling begins, so subtle that only those who intend to see it. Roosters misunderstanding nothing, interpret it correctly, and send a message along rooftops and courtyards with their declarative throats. Dogs answer because dogs consider themselves part of every important communication. Windows flicker. A woman leans out to shake a rug and decides not to, not yet. A man on a threshold touches the mezuzah of his own habit, the fixed point that is his family's shrine, and then his own forehead. By the time first light strokes the Campus Martius, the city's small rites have stitched the night into a single piece. The sacred hearth still breathes in its round house. The Leraria in 100,000 rooms hold the last warmth of their lamps. Incense has come and gone like weather. The great temples stand with doors shuttered but not asleep. Their thresholds are ready to know the exact pressure of broom and foot. Somewhere a priest with a ceremonial hat will pull it on with hands that are careful not to tie the fillets too tight. Somewhere a market woman will tie a kerchief with hands that are careful not to hide her hair completely because luck must see what it intends to bless. Over everything stretched the sky, no one's property, everyone's measure. The same stars that endorse the empire's boasts also sign the baker's quiet prayer and the porter's hope that his back will be trustworthy for another day. In that agreement, the city turns toward morning,